This has been an interesting bit of information that I've been reading up here on this morning, and this is information that was published a week ago by Lawfare, and it regards the number of folks who were issued clemency after the events of January 6th. When a mob went into the Capitol, and President Trump took office again for his second term, and very, very quickly did sort of blanket pardons for everybody involved. Initially, they'd begun looking at cases individually, ultimately decided to issue blanket pardons for so many here. What Lawfare has looked at is how many, and this is the title of what they published a week ago, how many clemency recipients have faced other charges. So to talk more about this, we want to bring in the editor-in-chief of Lawfare, Ben Wittes, joining us now. We've got Ben coming in. There he is. Ben, thank you so much for taking some time today. And
thanks for having me.
We've been having kind of a busy morning here in the Twin Cities with the Vance Belter guilty pleas here. But these are different court cases, and I read through the article that you published a week ago. First, for everybody, give a little background here of the mission of Lawfare. You established this as a way to kind of look at how our government interacts with the laws of the nation, and do they come into conflict at times. But I'll let you explain a little bit more of the purpose of Lawfare.
Yeah, Lawfare is a web news site and analysis site that focuses on national security legal issues. And so we have been around since 2010. And we cover all kinds of matters that bear on the relationship between security issues, policy issues, and law.
Now, in this article that published again last week, you write that at least 97 of the more than 1,500 individuals granted clemency by President Trump for their roles in the January 6th Capitol attack have been arrested, or charged with or convicted of crimes separate from that since their participation. Why did you feel that this was an important issue to look at? Why these were important statistics to define out in this way?
Well, so one of the questions when you grant a blanket pardon to a very large number of people is whether that is going to cause danger to the public. And particularly when you do it without any individualized review, and you release people who've been convicted for beating cops, you release people who've been convicted, grant clemency to people who've been convicted of things up to and including seditious conspiracy, some very violent activity. That raises a public safety question. And one way to look at how bad that public safety question is, or how under control it is to look at the question of whether this is or isn't a group of people who have, since the crimes associated with January 6th, or particularly since the pardons themselves, have they committed other crimes? And the answer to both questions is yes, although the vast majority of them are situations that predate the pardon. That is, sometime between January 6th, 2021 and the present, they have committed other crimes, sometimes quite violent crimes. There is a person who was arrested for a homicide the other day. There is one person, pulled somebody off of a moving motorcycle and badly injured him. There's a person who picked up a 12-year-old kid by the throat and hurled him to the ground. And there are numerous cases of, child sexual exploitation of one sort or another.
Yeah, and I looked through some of the statistics that you had published here, that one child molestation, 2 reckless homicide, at least 14 convicted of sex crimes, at least 6 of domestic violence, at least 20 DUI or some form of public intoxication, and that almost 1 in 16 have been arrested for and charged with these other crimes. Did you feel that in looking at this, that there had been no other avenue of transparency involving these instances and these statistics?
It's not a question of feeling. There had been no other avenue of transparency. So this story was written by my colleague, Catherine Pompilio, who, prior to this story, the estimates of the number of people who fit this description, the New York Times had editorialized that there were 39. A group called Crew had cited the number 40. So, when you really sat down and when Catherine really sat down to do this work, the number that we were able to document was 2.5 times what had previously been understood to be the answer to this question. And the reason for that is that, unlike when people are on parole, where they're monitored, right, and they have to check in with a parole officer, when you're pardoned, you're forgiven, and there is no further monitoring of you. And so if you're then arrested by local authorities and charged with something, there's no centralized reporting of any of that. It may not make, national press or anything. It may just be in your local county newspaper or not even reported at all, right? And so there's no way to know the answer to this question except to painstakingly go through the subsequent histories of 1,600 people.
How much time did that take to do that kind of investigation and find those histories?
So it was a time-consuming project. Catherine has been working on it for a number of months. She's had other things going on, so it wasn't the only thing she was working on. We also built some automation tools in order to help her do this. And so there was some use of AI tools that we built actually to facilitate tracking down 1,600 people. So it was a quite labor-intensive project, and it took a good long time. And by the way, I'm confident I speak for Catherine on this. We are confident there are people we missed, that the number is bigger than 97, that it will continue to grow because, of course, people do commit more crimes, but also that, even the data set that we assembled is incomplete.
You do have, too, on Lawfare, on your website, an online tracker. And how quickly is that updated?
You mean the tracker of the individuals that... Yeah, so whenever we find a new person that we are confident meets our standards, that person will be added to the tracker. Right now we haven't found anybody new who meets the criteria since we completed the article. So that number is still at 97, but as more fit our bill, we will update it.
Okay. In this article, it is written that pardon decisions are sometimes controversial, but past presidential administrations usually made them with much consideration and forethought. The Trump administration, by contrast, made the decision to follow through on political promises within hours of taking office. No pardon attorney review, no investigation in individual cases, no victim notification, no pretense of having carefully weighed the merits or the risks of putting individuals back on the streets. Tell us more about your thoughts here about the circumstances here compared to those previous presidential pardons.
Yeah, so typically presidents issue pardons using a process. And there are, of course, exceptions to that. Lots of presidents of the end of the Bill Clinton administration had a lot of pardons that kind of jettisoned the process. The end of the first Trump administration did too, the end of the Biden administration. But normally these things don't happen on the first day. they don't involve violent felonies, and they don't involve circumstances of no review whatsoever. And in Trump's defense on the January 6th pardons, he never pretended otherwise. He never pretended that, there had been a careful decision about whether an individual who had, you know, uh, beaten a police officer within, in a very serious, deadly manner, deserved to be let out of prison. There was, his position was a great injustice was done to this class of people, and therefore I am pardoning or commuting the sentences of the entire class. And that is, within the president's prerogatives as the executive to do it that way. It also means that, he's politically accountable for the decision, and he, has runs the risk when you do that, that whenever one of these people goes out and commits another crime, someone's going to bring it back and lay it on your doorstep.
Yeah, and that's something else that was noted here is that there was no evidence the administration considered their likelihood of recidivism to commit further crimes. But as you point out, he did what he said he was going to do. It was interested in doing. Beyond the transparency issue then here, just to really have these numbers more thoroughly examined, what is the other goal of this?
Well, I mean, the other goal is, as I say, political accountability. The pardon power is the most, one of the most unrestricted, what the Constitution, in constitutional language, is called plenary powers that the president has. He can do whatever he wants with it. There are basically no limits on it, at least with respect to federal offenses. And the one remedy that you have is political criticism. And therefore, transparency is really important because it's the only basis on which people get to say, hey, I think this was fine. I think this was a great thing to do. I don't think this is, having 97 criminals post January 6th. I think that's fine. It's worth it to get this done. Or conversely, to say, I really don't think this is okay. I think maybe I'll vote for the other party. Maybe I will, give money to, a charity that helps Capitol Police who were injured or whose careers were damaged in the course of this, right? The only mechanism that people have for thinking about how they should behave as democratic citizens in the response to a pardon is to know about it and to know about the consequences of it. And so that's what we tried to enable.
Yeah, a more informed electorate. All right.
Exactly.
Yeah, Ben Wittes, the editor-in-chief of Lawfare. If you want to read the full report published a week ago or any of the other work, lawfaremedia.org. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
All right.